Welcome to the Whole Athlete Podcast, where we focus on discussing topics to help you become a fat burner, optimize health, and improve performance in life and sports. Transform the whole you from the inside out with the holistic method. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Debbie Potts.
All right, everybody, it's Debbie, and I'm back with another truth bomb, amazing episode of the Whole Athlete Podcast. And this is one that we will listen to over and over again. But I don't want you just to listen to this one. You need to watch it. So head over, if you're not there already, to our YouTube channel, the Whole Athlete Podcast on YouTube. And we'll put the links for the video version and the audio version for our podcast, because I have one of these amazing, intelligent, funny, athletic, super smart person coming on the show. His name is Kiran, and he's from a supplement company I've been learning more about. Probiotics is the product, but he works for Microbiome Labs. And as I've become a nutritional therapy practitioner, and as I go into become a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner next year, I've been attending different workshops, conferences, and I met Kiran at FDN conference this year and was just fascinated by their information that they had. And I started watching their webinars on their website called microbiome.com, and it's just mind-blowing. And I get so excited. This information he's going to share today, it will just make you understand how important gut health is for racing, training, performing, optimizing your health, improving your aging process, autoimmune issues, food sensitivities, brain health. Oh my gosh, it's just, he explains it so well. So I really hope you enjoy this show. Just wanted to share with you Kiran's background. He is a brilliant young guy. He's a chief scientific officer at Physicians Exclusive Company Microbiome Labs. He's a speaker and on a lot of the summits out right now as the microbiome expert. He's a frequent lecturer on the human microbiome at many of the conferences, and he is talking today from Microbiome Labs about the gut-brain connection, about glyphosate, LPS, leaky gut, dysbiosis, all this information we hear about. And I've been using one of their supplements, the Probiotic, we're going to talk a little bit about, but really it's not selling you anything. We're just trying to educate you on the importance of your gut health, your microbiome, the gut wall lining, and how we need to protect it. So this episode will go great with another one we're having coming up soon is by Viome about your microbiome as well. So stay tuned as we bring you all these different topics to help improve the whole you from literally the inside out. And I know I'm on a continuous journey to get healthier and to be able to race again myself at a personal level. I want to go do triathlons and marathon again, but my body, if you've read my book, Life is Not a Race, has been damaged, and I still can't really get my body back to running a longer distance, and to, do an Ironman is like crazy sounding to me. So I am working on learning more, and I'm sharing my information that I gain with you, with the Kiran Coach program I've been in, with this DNA Fit I'm going to work with, and functional diagnostic nutrition next year. I'm here to share that information with you. If you want to do a little different type of coaching, you can let me know. If you'd like to call me, get a consultation, go to debbiepotts.net, my personal website, and learn more about the holistic method, because today's topic is very much part of the holistic method, transforming the whole you, learning how to burn fat, optimize health, and improve performance from the inside out. And Kiran today is going to make you more aware how important that gut health is to our entire health of our body. So I'm excited to dive into. So we're just going to jump into the interview. We were chatting and I started recording it. So watch the video because this is an hour-long webinar that he did for us on endurance athletes. And we will do a follow-up in a few months to go in a little deeper on some more topics related to performance and gut health. So let me know if you have questions. If you want to get more information on the Megasporbiotic, go to debbiepotts.net and I will send you the information. All right, guys, let's dive in, listen, and get notepad paper because you are going to want to geek out here and get some notes written down. All right, get into it. Enjoy.
Being a microbiologist, my natural gravitation was towards the microbiome. The microbiome is probably one of the more complex biological systems we've ever discovered and started looking into, and somehow it fits the way I'm wired. So it, I tend to get it pretty well, and so I've gone, full bore into the studying and analysis of the microbiome, because as it turns out, the more we look into it, the microbiome really plays a pinnacle role in everything we do, in our behaviors, in our choices, in our health outcomes, in our longevity, even in our relationships, and the choices we make there. All of those things seem to hinge on what's happening within your microbiome. And I'm an endurance athlete myself, so this was really interesting, a chance for me to get to talk to you a little bit. Of course, I haven't been as active in the racing circuit over the last year and a half because I've been traveling so much doing conferences, but I was a road racer, so I raced for a team in Chicago. So I did a lot of triathlons, duathlons, a lot of bike races, and that whole aspect of it, that optimizing performance. And then as you start to learn about what happens to the body when you go through the stress of high endurance or high intensity training, you start to realize that there are some things we really have to address if you are in the athletic space that you wouldn't think are important, because we think that that kind of high intensity, high endurance exercise is in general good for you. And it is good for you. There are a lot of benefits to it, but then it does affect certain things within the body that can have long-term consequences, aside from just the performance consequences in the short term. And so that part became really interesting to me as well. So when you start digging into the research, you find that a lot of people have studied this. The health consequences of long-term high intensity training or high endurance training, there are impacts. So I'm very excited to be able to talk to you about this. Yeah. And then a little bit more on my background. I've done probably 35 human clinical trials, designed and ran the trials, published a few papers as well. And right now we are in the midst of doing about 12 active clinical trials in many different areas. A lot of it focused on the impact of prebiotics and probiotics on the microbiome. And in particular, how do we modulate the microbiome for overall health benefit?
Yeah, well, I found this information, what you guys have on the website and your webinars, and meeting you at the Functional Diagnostic Nutrition Conference, FDN, this summer, that there's just so much for us to share to endurance athletes. And for me, at a personal level, I used to do Ironmans for many years, and 2001, 2012, and since 2013 till now, I've not been able to race. I kind of broke myself from the inside out and wrote a book about it, Life is Not a Race. And now my purpose, I feel, is to help educate other athletes, endurance athletes, so they can do this safely. You love to do triathlons or running events, but not harm our body and speed up the aging process and break your whole internal body systems at a cellular level, because that's what I think happened to me. And I see so many athletes just, overtraining and under recovery and just not looking at the gut biome that we do as nutritional therapy practitioners and FDN and all the other functional medicine people out there. I think we really need to share this information and teach it to endurance athletes. So
Yeah.
that's where we're going to go today, is down that road. And you
Awesome.
put together some slides together. So, and I have a bunch of questions written down. So let's just start with your slides and see where our journey takes us today.
Okay, awesome. Sounds good. Let's see if we can do the screen sharing properly now. Okay, let's see.
So while he's doing that, you guys might have heard us talk on the podcast about leaky gut. And so we'll kind of talk about how your gut health really impacts your ability to train, recover, repair, and get the nutrients out of it. And so many of us have that permeable gut wall lining. Also talk about gut-brain connection. So we've got lots to dive into, and we might have to do this a couple sessions because there's so much I think we need to learn. So here we've got this screen share. So make sure you guys go to the Whole Athlete Podcast YouTube channel and put the links in the audio version. But let's let you take it over.
Yeah, so you can see my screen okay?
Yeah, it looks great.
All right, and then let me know as I'm advancing the slides if they don't advance.
It just got blurry, so whatever you just did, put it back, because now you can't read it as well.
Oh, okay. I actually didn't do anything.
Oh.
It says, please move this window away from the shared application. I'm not sure what that means. Is it still blurry?
A little bit, the words are, but we can go over it. Here,
okay, did you see it?
All right. Okay, so the first slide, if you guys can listen or watch, we're going to talk about exercise and the gut. So
yeah.
take it away.
So this is it's a study that I put up. It was actually published in 1997. So we've been, and the purpose of that is we've been studying this for quite some time, over the last over 20 years. Also, I put up because it's a study from University of Iowa, which is my old alma mater. So it must be good work. Only a billion people go there, obviously. And what was interesting about this is they were looking at the effect of running intensity on intestinal permeability. So we all know that as leaky gut. We know that leaky gut has a significant impact on our overall health. And what they showed is that when you're running at around 30 to 50% of your VO2 max, you get very little change in intestinal permeability. But once you start going towards 80% of your VO2 max, the intestinal permeability dramatically increases. So that was the purpose of this study. And of course, information on the microbiome wasn't really available at that time. We didn't really start understanding the effects and impact on the microbiome until about 2007, so about 10 years after this was published. But even at that point, we started to see that there were permeability issues when you start doing very high intensity training. And that can, of course, have a huge impact on overall health and wellness. Mm-hmm. So this next study is much more recent. This is from 2016 or 17. It was published in the Journal of Sports and Health Science. And this is what we call a meta-analysis. If you're not familiar with what a meta-analysis is, it's a publication that reviews a whole bunch of studies on this topic and provides a final consensus on the topic. You know, because science, it's important to note that science is derived from consensus. It's not derived from any single studies, right? So any single study has some value to it, but it doesn't mean that you can conclusively say anything from one study. You have to be able to put together a whole body of evidence, especially evidence that supports mechanisms and things like that, to really be sure what your conclusions are. And that's why I like looking at meta-analysis papers, because this particular publication looked at somewhere around 150 to 200 other studies and reviewed all of the data from all of those studies and then came to these conclusions. So it's important to note this conclusion here I put on the my right-hand side of the screen, where they say endurance athletes present a high prevalence of upper respiratory tract infection. So there is some reason why endurance athletes tend to have more upper respiratory tract infection than your average person walking down the street. and I'll explain why that may be. And they also tend to experience more gastrointestinal trouble, including increased permeability of the gastrointestinal epithelial, that's the lining of your intestinal wall, which they talk about, so-called leaky gut, which I love because in the research allopathic world, they've refrained from using the term leaky gut because that's been in the integrative space for a couple of decades, and they've always said there is no such thing as leaky gut. But now we're starting to see it in publications more, and they talk about that this arises from the disruption of mucus thickness. So that's a really important thing I'll talk about in the next slide, and higher rates of bacterial translocation. What that means is bacteria moving from where it should be in the intestinal lining to where it shouldn't be. So that's bacterial translocation. And there's a whole bunch of studies showing all of the downstream negative effects of bacterial translocation. That simple movement of bacteria from here to here, a few millimeters, can cause a whole host of trouble. Right, and again, I'll go through that a little bit in the next slide. And what they conclude, which is really interesting and exciting for us especially, is they say the review also supports the hypothesis that modifying the microbiota through the use of probiotics could be an important therapeutic tool to improve athletes' overall general health, which is one of the things we're talking about today, performance, which is going to be important to all athletes, and energy availability while controlling inflammation and redox levels, right? And so that is the crux of hopefully this talk, and that's the message that we want to put across. We're not saying, don't do a lot of training, don't do high intensity races, don't do Ironmans, any of that stuff. What we're saying is that when you do that type of training, when you do those types of races, when you perform at that high level, there is a consequence that we have to be cognizant of, and then how do you address that consequence so you don't have any negative aspect of that kind of training and lifestyle, right? So this next illustration shows it best, and I don't know if does it look blurry?
No, it looks good. It's lots of information on this one.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So here if we start looking clockwise from the liver, right? So from the liver all the way till we get to the respiratory tract, the alveoli and so on, it's all of the really good beneficial things that can occur when you do this type of high intensity training. For example, in the liver, you increase metabolism. You do get some reduction of blood flow, but overall that comes back when you're at rested state. In the fat tissue, you do increase metabolism, you increase blood flow to metabolize more fat to provide energy. It can increase free fatty acids, which is a problem, because increased free fatty acids in the body can cause inflammation. It can cause damage to the lining in your blood vessels. It can induce oxidation in different parts of your body. So that is something that athletes have to be concerned about, is the increase in free fatty acids. On the metabolism side, on the blood flow side, it does create heat production and dehydration. But of course, hopefully, people are doing the smart thing and giving themselves adequate times to recover from high-intensity training or races, so that you do undo some of that dehydration issues, and you do reduce that internal heat that's built up, because that internal heat can actually cause problems. We know that a 1 degree increase in core temperature can bring down performance by 25-30%. Right, because that few degrees of heat increase can actually denature proteins and cause a lot of metabolic and heat stress in the cells that can be very damaging, not only to your performance at the time, but overall, if you keep doing that without that adequate recovery, you start to get more and more damaged cells, more and more damaged DNA, more damaged mitochondria, and so on. So that's something that athletes do have to be cognizant of. In the brain, we do stimulate neuronal activity, increase blood flow, you get a better blood distribution within the brain, and of course, increase metabolism during the exercise period and during resting phase as well. In the lungs, you do get increased ventilation, increased blood flow, and possibly blood distribution, which are all good things. In the heart, the good things are increased cardiac output, increased coronary blood flow, which is the blood flow that feeds the heart itself, because remember, the heart is a muscle that needs its own energy. Increased oxygen consumption, and better blood flow distribution. That's something that's being looked into as well. Better in the blood cells itself, we get better hemoglobin concentration and more oxygenation, which is positive. In the lungs, we do get better arterial dilation, so your lungs actually function better for oxygen exchange. So those are all the positive things that occur with the stress that we create on the body, and hopefully the adequate recovery time with in between trainings and races. Now, there are some of these other negative things that occur. I mentioned what occurs in the fat and the liver that can be a problem. But if you look at in the muscle fiber itself, you do get increased metabolism and blood flow to the muscles, which is a good thing, which is a positive thing. You do get better oxygen extraction and consumption in the muscle. But the downside is you do get a lot more oxidative stress. Right, and oxidative stress can be very damaging to the body, very damaging to cells, and damaging to your mitochondria itself. You do get more mitochondrial biogenesis, which is a mixed bag, because more mitochondrial biogenesis can produce more energy, but it can also lead to more mitochondrial dysfunction, which is a hallmark of certain chronic conditions. And you, of course, end up with muscle damage. But muscle damage can be recovered if you, again, allow adequate recovery time, right? And then in the bones and other areas in blood flow, you do get systemic inflammation and a negative immune response from all the high-intensity training. You do get improved mechanical strain, which is good on the bones itself, and release of certain stem cells for the rebuilding. Those are positive things, but then you do get the systemic inflammation and the down-regulation of the immune system, and in fact, more up-regulation of the inflammatory part of the immune system. In the gut, in the pancreas, kidney, and the rest of the gut, you do get improved blood flow and improved metabolism, but you do end up with this intestinal permeability, and that's a big issue. So at the end of the day, what we really need to focus on when we're talking about high-intensity training, when we're talking about the active lifestyle, when we're talking about racing and doing all of these things that we love to do, we do have to pay attention to our oxidative stress, giving our body adequate amounts of time to rebuild, and then dealing with the gut permeability, because gut permeability can be a huge negative long-term impact. Of course, it can have short-term alterations in your performance, in how you live day to day, in the types of foods that you can eat, in how your body responds to foods. You know, if you end up with diarrhea the day before the race or the day of the race, that's likely due to some of the permeability issues, the stress and the nervousness in terms of performance. Those things all lead to more permeability as well. So those things all have to be addressed adequately also. So I'm going to focus on this whole permeability issue and what is essentially happening to the microbiome, and how can we repair that and modulate that in the next few slides. Any thoughts or questions, Debbie, from those couple slides?
No, I think that's great. I think what we need to look more at is the leaky gut and mitochondrial health for endurance athletes. It's what I keep hearing more and more of, and I think it's not really looked into enough by training for racing and recovery.
Yep. Absolutely. And in fact, there's something called the mitochondrial microbiome muscle axis, right? And this is it's a mouthful. It's not something you could say very fast or very eloquently. But basically what it shows is that, of course, the microbiome produces a whole bunch of what we call postbiotics. So these are compounds that are produced by bacteria, like short-chain fatty acids, heat shock proteins, all of these things that impact the energy homeostasis in the muscles and in the mitochondria. And then the muscles will produce, the microbiome will produce something called myokines when the muscles are undergoing a lot of stress. And those myokines actually help modulate the production of muscle fiber and mitochondria within the muscles itself. And so there's a deep connection there. And if your gut is not healthy, you don't end up facilitating that connection between the microbiome and the mitochondria in the muscles, because our largest store of mitochondria in our body is in our skeletal muscles. Right there, our skeletal muscles can contain anywhere from 2 to 2,400 mitochondria in one cell.
Wow.
Right, and the more you exercise, the more mitogenesis occurs, and the more mitochondria your muscle cells try to put together to provide all the energy that you're demanding.
Yeah.
And it requires these myokines and other compounds from the microbiome in order to do that properly, or they will create dysfunctional mitochondria within the muscles. So just from a performance standpoint, it becomes extremely important to address the gut and make sure your gut is healthy in order to get all of the gains and benefits you hope to get from all the exercise as well. But let's talk about leaky gut. So if you look at this diagram here on the left-hand side, you see what it looks like to have kind of a normal, healthy gut. And can you see my cursor when I'm moving it around?
Yes, I can.
Okay, cool. All right. So then this whole blue region, this light blue and dark blue region, is called a mucosa. And in the top part of the mucosa, the reason why they're different colors is because there are distinct layers within the mucosa. So in the top part of the mucosa, it's a more kind of liquid layer which is where most of the microbes live within the gut itself. So this upper part here, which is not shown, would be the lumen, which is the tube in the intestine where the food and all that goes through. So the next layer down is this the outer part of the mucosa where all the bugs live, and then the inner part is something called mucin 2, which is more of a thick barrier type of mucus. It's imagine Jello versus over here is syrup. That thick Jello-like structure is supposed to act as a barrier to prevent bacteria from going from here where they live to the inner part of the mucosa, right? So that's what that paper was talking about when they're talking about bacterial translocation and disruption of that mucus layer. They're talking about breaking down of this mucin 2 and bacteria moving from here all the way to the inner part of the mucosa. Now, this is a significant issue. Right? So this is the same pathology, for example, that occurs when someone develops colorectal cancer. So colorectal cancer, which is a devastating disease that will kill 50,000 Americans this year, the treatment options aren't very good. It occurs from two types of bacteria, Bacteroides and E. coli, moving from this top part to the inner part, setting up shop on the inner part, and then producing toxins that cause inflammation in your intestinal lining. Long-term exposure to that type of inflammation can lead to cancerous cells and form the formation of colorectal cancer. So that's how serious this translocation of bacteria from this area to this area can be. It's also the same thing that drives heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, autoimmune conditions, allergies, asthma. All of the same stuff is because we break down this layer and bacteria are allowed to translocate from here to here. That's what we're describing on this other right-hand side. When you have a breakdown in this mucosal barrier, you end up getting more and more bacteria migrating through or translocating through. And eventually, the type of inflammation that occurs because of that translocation causes these intestinal cells to break down, and then you have really apparent leaky gut, which means that not only are the bacteria translocating from the top part of the mucus to the inner part, but they're going all the way through and entering into your blood. So this area is the blood right here, right? So how does this occur? Well, it starts with something called dysbiosis. Dysbiosis is a term used to describe a dysfunctional microbiome, right? So one that is not in balance. And there are a couple of features of a dysbiotic microbiome that seems to be fairly universal when we look at people whose guts are a little bit messed up. And this is some of the things that occur when we start doing really high intensity exercise, because part of the thing that drives the training induced permeability is, of course, the stress that's associated with it. But then the other part is we also eat really weird stuff, right? I mean, think about when you're doing a 6-hour bike ride, or when you're doing an Ironman or training for an Ironman, or you're running a marathon. We're eating weird goos and gels and gummies and these honey things and all of this weird stuff that is really not that good for your gut microbiome. Right? So our diets are completely wacky. We're doing unusual amounts of protein. When you do really high levels of protein, you actually end up with really high ammonia levels, and that high ammonia level starts to kill off a lot of the good bacteria and increases the growth of certain bacteria that can become problematic. Right? And so all of these things that we do as we're training actually causes significant amount of dysbiosis. Right, so some of those can be looked at as lowering of keystone strains. So there are certain keystone strains within the microbiome that offer a significant protection against this entire dysfunction right here, against this breakdown of the mucosal layer, this allowing for the translocation of a whole bunch of bacteria, viruses, protozoa, and so on, all of the stuff that lives in our gut. And then the upregulation of the inflammatory response to those bacteria being in the wrong spot, and then eventually the disruption of our intestinal tight junctions. So these keystone strains are Akkermansia muciniphila, Faecalibacter prausnitzii, a few bifidobacteria like Bifidobacter longum, Bifidobacter animalis. These are really important strains that exist naturally in your gut. They're already there, but they end up getting suppressed, or they become dysfunctional because you end up growing too many other bacteria, right? And that dysfunction is described as low diversity. So diversity in your microbiome is described as the richness of your microbiome, meaning how many different organisms you have in any given area, and then how even those organisms are. Because even if you have high richness, you have lots of different organisms, but the evenness is off, meaning you've got a lot of one type of organism in one area, too many of one type of organism in another area, you start to lose that diversity, that biodiversity within the gut. And that biodiversity is paramount to health. That's the number one thing to be aware of when you're talking about gut health and the microbiome, is the importance of biodiversity within the microbiome. That's the richness and the evenness of the microbial population, right?
Yeah.
So those are things that we have to address. Now, you might still have Akkermansia, you might still have Faecalibacter, you might still have good Bifidobacteria, but if they're not even, if the richness of those organisms aren't present, if they are concentrated to one particular area, you won't get all of the protective benefits of these microbes. So these are called keystone strains, and then beyond the presence and the growth of the keystone strains, we want to ensure that we maintain diversity in the microbiome, right? So high keystone strains, high diversity protects against this disruption that we're seeing here, right? So when our keystone strains are low and our diversity is low, you do get the disrupted mucosa, because one of the ways that these bacteria protect against this disrupted mucosa is they produce large amounts of short-chain fatty acids. They produce butyrate, propionate, acetate. These short-chain fatty acids are what's responsible for stimulating goblet cells in your intestinal lining to rebuild the mucosa, right? So it's okay for the mucosa to get damaged and sloughed off and turn over, but you need to continue to be able to rebuild it. And the signals for rebuilding come from these bacteria. Right? So that's why when these bacteria are low and you have low diversity and you're not converting your carbohydrates into short-chain fatty acids, you're going to end up with a dysfunctional mucosa. Right? And so now when your mucosa is damaged and you're getting all of these bacteria translocating through, the only way your immune system can try to defend you is by upregulating your inflammatory innate immune response, which ends up causing a disrupted mucosal immune response. Because what's really supposed to happen with regards to the immune response in the mucosa is you're supposed to get a small amount of translocation occurring on a regular basis. As those few amount of bacteria, viruses, food particles, and all that translocate, your immune system comes in, takes a look at them, figures out whether or not they are friend or foe, or if it's something that they have to be worried about. And typically, if your immune system's functioning right, they'll figure out they don't need to worry about it. And then you produce something called oral tolerance against these things. So then you end up not reacting in an inflammatory way to everything your body sees. In this case, when you have a flood of microbes and viruses and food particles and all coming through, your immune system cannot do that slow recognition process to develop adaptations and resilience against these things. It just sends in that inflammatory army and goes attack everything, right? Because it can't handle it. And then as it's attacking all of this stuff, it also ends up attacking your intestinal lining cells itself. And that leads to something called dysfunctional gut barrier. That's the more fancy term, one of the fancy terms for leaky gut. So now you have really apparent leaky gut. And then eventually you end up getting LPS, which is one of the main bacterial toxins that are produced in your gut. You get that leaking through and into your circulatory system. You get mold toxins, mycotoxins that tend to be present not only in the food that you're eating, but in your gut itself, if you've ever been exposed to mold, which we all have been quite a bit, right? And then viruses, flagellin, all of these other things moving into your circulatory system and causing huge amounts of inflammation. So this is what's happening. So as you are running and training and cycling and doing all of these things that you need to do to become fit, to be able to perform, to do well on your next race, when you're doing all of that stuff, what's happening on the inside is this kind of system is breaking down and you're ending up with severe leaky gut. That's why when you review all of the signs, athletes tend to have high levels of chronic upper respiratory infection, and part of that is because now the immune system is completely, is not completely, but substantially dysfunctional. And when you disrupt the mucosal lining in your gut, you actually disrupt the mucosal lining all over your body, including your upper respiratory system. So female athletes tend to get higher levels of bacteriovaginosis and yeast infections and all that. Again, because if you disrupt the mucosal lining in your gut, you disrupt the mucosal lining in your urogenital tract as well. So that mucosal lining covers every part of the inside of your body. It's in fact the largest surface area of your body. It's about 50 times more surface area than your skin itself. And the gut is the central command system for all the other mucosal tissue in your body. So when your gut mucosa is off, your sinus mucosa is going to be off, your upper respiratory tract in your lungs is going to be off, your urogenital mucosa is going to be off. So you end up with all of these high risk of infections. And then long term, what that does is because the gut-brain connection is so profound and LPS leaking in from the lumen, which is the tube part of your intestine, into your circulatory system on a regular basis, can actually get to your brain and disrupt serotonin function and dopamine function. It actually makes it harder and harder for you to deal with stress outside of even training. So then people can become more susceptible to anxiety and depression and inability to deal with day-to-day stress, along with the stress of exercise and performance and racing and all of that stuff. So all of this snowballs. Also, athletes go through a lot of stress in their joints and their muscles and all that. When you are inflamed in your body, when your inflammation levels go up really high and your oxidative stress levels go up really high, it opens athletes up for the risk of autoimmune disease like rheumatoid arthritis, right? And it also opens up for more profound injury as well. And it's harder for your body to recover because your inflammation and your immune system is going haywire. So all of these things kind of boil together, and it can cause some significant long-term disruption. But the good news is we can do something about it. But before I go on to that part, any thoughts or questions on this part?
Well, this is so fascinating to me as endurance athlete for, 20 years and focusing on more coaching people with nutritional therapy. I think everyone needs to listen to what you just said a few times because it is probably a lot of people. I'm sure everyone has something they can relate to what you're talking about today. And, looking at symptoms and treatment we'll get into, but this is amazing information that we all have some level of leaky gut, if you're athlete or not. And I think it's this unknown, what is the root cause for all these symptoms people have? They just can't get help. And so if you just always start with treating the gut, as we'll get into, it's just exciting news to me. It's, it sounds depressing if you hear like you have this, but knowing what you can figure out what is really going on, and always start healing that gut first and then figure out what else is going on. But I think it's just exciting information. I'm just smiling sitting here because it's like, this is cool stuff.
You are nerding out with me.
Yeah,
I love it.
I love it.
And one of the, I work with a lot of athletes and I trained with a lot of endurance athletes for years. And one of the things I noticed with a lot of people report is they would get breakouts, right? From the training on your back, on your face, and places like that. We also know that there's a significance between the gut-skin axis, and that acne lesions or breakouts, or even things like eczema or rosacea and things like that. All of those things start in the gut. We just finished a dermatology study at UC Davis where we're seeing a significant change in the skin, in the skin microbiome, the immune system in the skin, the sebum quality, the hydration levels in the skin, wrinkle appearance, acne lesions, all of that stuff by treating the gut with a probiotic for 30 days, just 30 days. Yeah. Right. So all of those things, all of the things that you might notice or you might connect to from the high intensity training, it could be mood issues, it could be sensitivity issues, it could be food sensitivities, allergies perk up, sleeplessness, right? Sleeplessness, skin issues like we talked about, autoimmune disease, all of this stuff, diarrhea, indigestion, upper respiratory infection. All of this is due to this dysfunction right here that we're describing.
Crazy.
Right? And it's crazy. Yeah. It's what we call this the ground zero of most health disorders, because most chronic illnesses occur and start in this area. And if we can somehow prevent this from occurring, if we can fix these keystone strain issues, if we can fix diversity, rebuild the mucosa, and prevent things from leaking through, we can dramatically reduce the impact that chronic illness has on us. We can also reverse any negative aspect of the high intensity and high endurance training. So that's what we'll talk about next.
Yeah, and I want people to understand too, it's not just high intensity training. Even if you're doing low MAF heart rate, it's called max aerobic function, low heart rate training, it's still that chronic cardio and just doing too much. And that endurance training, I know Ben Greenfield program I'm in, we're talking about 30 to 45 minute sessions, and then, no longer than an hour and a half on a long workout once a week or even once a month. But I think, it's when you're doing Ironman or a 50K trail run or a marathon, you have to do more than that. But I think, it is that stress you're putting in your body, whatever duration that you are doing, on top of eating food that, if you're not on the real food, low carb, high fat, whatever, paleo, that you're still having foods that are going to cause irritation to your gut wall lining, as well as what we've talked a lot about is digestion. And in nutritional therapy, we always work north to south, being in a relaxed mindset in that parasympathetic nervous system when you are eating. So it's not just, exercise we're focusing on today, but keep in mind, what you're eating and how you're eating and what your mindset is. They're all important parts. So absolutely. Let's go on. I just had to throw that in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Makes sense. And so we started out by, and this was a study we did like 4 years ago. We wanted to see what one of our spores, and this is just the Bacillus subtilis HU58, that's one of our kind of flagship spores. We wanted to see what was its impact on the microbiome in terms of short chain fatty acid production. So that's butyrate, propionate, and acetate. And then what was some of the other modulations it would do. And if once we verified that the spore or spores could have an impact on how the microbiome was functioning, then we took the next steps to look at what about this 5-strain combination that we have in Megaspore? What will that do for the microbiome, especially in reference to all of the things that we know get disrupted in chronic illness, and of course in training as well. So in this first slide here, you can see compared to a dextrin control. So this is a fiber control. What is occurring in terms of short chain fatty acid production. So if you add just fiber and this is a healthy microbiome, if you add just fiber, your total amount of short chain fatty acids being produced is about 40 micromoles per liter. Right now, when you add in the probiotic, we jump from 40 all the way to 60 micromoles per liter. Acetate production, which is really important because acetate is one of the first short-chain fatty acids that are produced when you add in the right probiotic. And acetate goes along and starts to improve the diversity of the microbiome. And then acetate also becomes the substrate to produce the other short-chain fatty acids like butyrate and propionate. So we saw when you first add the spore into the microbiome, you get a huge jump in acetate, which is really fantastic. The acetate levels were around 30 micromoles per liter, and it's jumped up to close to 50 micromoles per liter. This is just in the first few hours of the spores getting in. Now, this graph right here shows what happens over time when you continue adding the spores in. So you get an initial bump in, and this is a control period, right? So this is when there's nothing being done. This is just measuring what occurs to the microbiome naturally before you add in the spores. So in the control period, you see, very little movement on the amount of short chain fatty acids. Then when you add in the spores, you get that initial bump, and then starts to taper off a little bit. You do get that initial increase in acetate, but then acetate levels start to come down, and then you start getting butyrate going up after the first week. Now, that's really fantastic because butyrate is the thing that fixes your gut lining. Butyrate is the thing that improves that mucosal barrier. Butyrate turns on fat burning not only in your cells, in your colonocytes, but then also in all of the peripheral tissue in your body, right? Because butyrate will actually bind something called GPR receptors, so G protein coupled receptors on your fat tissue, which stimulates all of your other cells in your body to look for fat for fuel, right? Butyrate does all of these amazing things, and we start to see a huge increase in butyrate over the control period. So over the control period, this microbiome had barely 5 micromoles of butyrate being produced. By the end of the second week of adding the probiotic, we had 20 micromoles. So we're increasing butyrate by 4 or 5 times. And that's quite significant. The other thing that we saw, which is really awesome, was almost an immediate decrease in ammonia levels. And we know one of the things that occurs when you train a lot, when you take a lot of protein, is ammonia levels start to go up because ammonia is a breakdown product of protein metabolism. Right, and so ammonia levels start to climb up in your gut. That actually brings up the pH, and that allows for certain dysfunctional bacteria to start to overgrow, and it suppresses a lot of the lactic acid producing bacteria, so it causes dysfunction. The other problem that ammonia has in the gut is ammonia has to be cleared through your portal vein, so through your liver. And so your liver undergoes a ton of stress trying to clear all of this ammonia that's being produced in your gut. And so what we saw is within 24 and 48 hours of adding in the spore, we see almost a 50% reduction in both counts. I mean, in the 24-hour, we see more than a 50% reduction. In the 48-hour, we see close to a 50% reduction in ammonia levels, right? So this was one of the first studies that we did that gave us confidence that yes, the spores are going to be making a significant difference in the microbiome, especially when we're looking at the things that really matter. So then the next set of studies that we did, we were looking at the further benefits by increasing keystone strains. Can the spores actually increase Akkermansia? Can the spores increase fecalum bacteria, lactobacilli, and bifidobacteria? So we wanted to see, can it improve the microbiome that way? Can it increase short-chain fatty acids, so the butyrate, propionate, and acetate? And we were looking at the 5-strain combination together. And then, most importantly, we want to see if we can improve diversity within the microbiome itself. So then the next set of data is going to show you what occurs when you just add the spores, just the megaspore itself. But then we, of course, I don't know if you know, I'm sure you do, Debbie, that we launched a prebiotic product, Omega Prebiotic, right? So then we did this study to show the symbiosis or symbiotic nature of the prebiotic and the megaspore biotic together. So the data will have, one side will be the improvement with just the spores, and then when you add in the prebiotic, you'll see how much better everything gets. Because again, really what we want at the end of the day is a true symbiogenic product, one that has a prebiotic and a probiotic, but that's going to give you the most profound effect. So when you look at this first thing, we're looking at the increase in Faecalum bacteria prosnitzi. So this is the blue is the control, right? And this is the transverse colon and the descending colon. The red is the increase in Faecalum bacteria prosnitzi when you add in just the spores.
Whoever invented these names?
I know, right?
It's like whoever came up with Pronolitzel and all these. So funny. Sorry.
So I think a lot of times it is the original name comes from the person that discovers it. So like Faecalum bacteria, it just means a bacteria that was identified initially in feces, and then prosnitzi, I believe, is this researcher whose last name is Prosnitzi or something like that discovered this bacteria. So it becomes this really crazy name, Faecalum bacteria prosnitzi. But if you say it to people, you sound very smart. So that's good. And if you haven't, you are really smart too. But so here's what we saw. We saw this dramatic increase just by adding in the spores. Because remember, our probiotic Megaspore does not contain Faecalum bacteria prosnitzi. Right? But the fact that we increase the growth of this really, really important bacteria, this keystone strain that protects your gut, is really profound, because no other probiotics ever been shown to be able to go in and increase the growth of other beneficial bacteria, which is really what we want to try to achieve. Right? So, and if you look at this change here, it goes from 2.2 times 10 to the 6 to 3.2 times 10 to the 7. Now, if it's been a long time since you've looked at scientific notation in numbers, what this means is more than a 10-fold increase, right? So it's not a 1-fold. This is a 10x increase in the amount of this bacteria. Here it's even more profound, because we go from 3.3 times 10 to the 5 to 3.6 and 10 to the 7. That's a 100-fold increase. Wow. Right? Because this is a logarithmic scale. So every base 10 is adds on. So this is a 100-fold increase in this really important protective strain. Now, I'll give you an example why this strain is so important. It's being studied really extensively in the case of IBD, Crohn's and colitis, right? And what has been shown through thousands of pages of studies is that high levels of Faecalum bacteria prosnitzi protect against IBD, protecting against all types of inflammatory conditions in the bowel. Crohn's, colitis, pre-IBD, and then the other big one is colorectal cancer. People that tend to have colorectal cancer or IBD tend to have very low levels of Faecalum bacteria prosnitzi. If you increase it, it protects against those conditions. So having high levels of this type of probiotic strain is really significant in your gut. You will not find Faecalum bacteria prosnitzi in any probiotic product, because it's a really sensitive strain. It's extremely sensitive to oxygen, to processing. It will not make it through the gastric system. It is an endogenous strain that is present in your gut, and we have found a way to regrow that 10 to 100 times higher than normally would, right? So then what we did was we took the same microbiome and we added the symbiotic in there. And I know when you look at this visually, it looks like this is not as high, but if you look at the numbers, this goes from 9.4 times 10 to the 7 to 1.2 times 10 to the 10. right? So that's a 3 log increase, right? That's a 1,000-fold increase in the number of this bacteria, right? So it's increased the number of of bacteria 10 times 3. So it is really quite significant. And again, that shows you that the symbiosis, the symbiotic combination is even better than just the spores. But if you're doing just the spores, you're doing pretty phenomenal. Same thing with lactobacilli. We saw a measurable increase with just adding the spores itself. And then when you add the spores and the prebiotic, you see a dramatic increase. Again, 100-fold increase across the board in all parts of the large intestine. And then the other one was bifidobacteria. We saw a measurable increase. This individual actually had fairly high bifidobacteria levels to begin with. So we didn't see too much of an increase, but we did see some measured increase, which is good because, again, if the levels are already good, you don't necessarily want it to be overgrown because that will throw off your diversity. That'll throw off the evenness of the bacteria, right? Mm-hmm. So this was actually really promising to see that they already had high levels and it didn't overmodulate those bacteria. When you added in the prebiotic, we did see some further increase of bifidobacteria, but again, at a modest level because this person already had relatively high amounts of bifidobacteria. Akkermansia in this microbiome was actually below detection level even with the spores. But then when we added in the prebiotic, we started to see a significant growth in Akkermansia. Right. So again, it just shows the power of having the probiotic and the prebiotic together. And in fact, our ancestors would have gotten them both together because the spores are ubiquitous in the environment. Our ancestors got exposure to them by eating dirt, digging for roots and tubers, plucking fruits and seeds and nuts and eating them without sterilizing everything. So they got large doses of the spores. But then in all the foods they ate, like the roots and tubers and fruits, they also got these key oligosaccharide prebiotics. Mm-hmm. So our ancestors got all of this benefit, right? So we started with all of this significant benefit. Now we've finally launched the product that brings us back to how we originated to get our prebiotic and probiotics together. And we're seeing the benefits being quite profound. The other things we're looking at is short-chain fatty acid production. It's okay if this little graph doesn't quite make sense, but what this shows is this is a control period where we see some short-chain fatty acids being produced. And then right here where it says TR1 in all of these graphs, that's where we add in the probiotic. You can start to see short-chain fatty acid production starting to take off. It goes up and down to some degree, but overall what you start to see is a huge amount of short-chain fatty acid being produced. That's the butyrate, propionate, and acetate. But then, compared to that, when we add in the prebiotic with the probiotic, I mean, look at these numbers. That's how you want the stock market to look, right? But this is what's going on in your gut. The richness and the ability to produce short-chain fatty acids goes through the roof. And these are the things that are very protective to our immune system, protective to our gut lining, protective to our metabolic system, has all of these amazing beneficial impacts on our body. And this is really what we want to see occurring on a regular basis. This is what protects us from the stress and the oxidative damage that occurs when you're doing your training. This is what protects us from the stress and the toxicity in the environment that we live in, the environment that's full of glyphosate and herbicides and pesticides, the antibiotics that we've all taken, the preservatives in all our food products and all that. This is what protects against that, the ability to produce this level of short-chain fatty acids, butyrate, propionate, and acetate, and then even more profound to that, this is the other donor. We're saying same kind of thing, but I want to show you. I don't have the diversity data on here. One quick second. Let me pull that up too while we have it, because that part is actually really quite profound. And if you don't get to see that, it would be not as fun and exciting.
And I know we talk a lot about, goals to burn fat, ability to burn fat, optimize health. We talked about improved performance. So burning fat, do you find as you're pulling that up, that people, if they can't, they're exercising, they're eating good food, but they just still can't lose weight. And I'm sure rebuilding the gut wall lining, creating more diversity in the gut, how does that help you be able to burn fat more?
So, and weight loss is not just about burning fat. And that's one of the misconceptions. You could be fat burning, but still have a significant amount of adipose tissue.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the ways that that happens is because that leaky gut that we talked about and that migration of LPS from the lumen into the circulatory system, when LPS goes and interacts with your fat cell, it actually swells the fat cell. And it actually causes the fat cell to retain fat. And so when you have visceral fat and when you have a fat that's more on the outer layers of your body and cutaneous fat and visceral fat, so imagine that visceral fat and cutaneous fat are being interacted with this LPS, and it's causing those fat cells to swell and increase in volume. So you could be losing fat by burning fat cells, but then all the other fat cells are swelling anyway. So then you've got this larger appearance still. You
feel
so
puffy too, though. You just feel like
puffy.
you're kind of retaining water and feel just inflamed.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And so that's a big issue. And that can occur even if you're training extensively. You can't lose weight even though you're training a lot. And a lot of it is because of that endotoxemia. But here's the data on the increase in diversity. So the AC is ascending colon, TC is transverse colon, DC is descending colon. We look very specifically at the different colonic regions, which is really important. Are you seeing the screen share?
Yes,
okay.
I need my blue blocking glasses on. I didn't put my blue blockers on the screen.
Oh, I know. I should do that too, but I always fail to do that when I'm doing a webinar because I always look like a huge dork with those things on.
You need the Swannies. You look stylish with Swannies.
With Swannies? I have Gunner Optics are the ones I use. I should try the Swannies. But if you look here, this is in the control in the ascending colon. The what we call the diversity index is at 2.61. And this is done in Europe. That's why instead of decimal points, they're giving commas. So this data comes from Belgium, where we did our study. And you can see that we've almost doubled the diversity in the ascending colon. We've had almost a 50% increase in the diversity in transverse colon and a measurable increase in the diversity in the descending colon as well. And in this case, in the transverse colon, we did see almost a doubling of the diversity. Same here with the ascending colon and a modest increase in the descending colon. So this is really profound because there are numerous studies that show that diversity is paramount to health. Diversity protects against many of the chronic illnesses that we deal with. It increases longevity. In fact, it reduces oxidative stress. Diversity makes you more resilient against infection. All of these things that are so important come because of increased diversity within the microbiome, and nothing else, certainly no probiotic or nutritional product has been shown to be able to increase diversity. The only other things that have been shown to increase diversity up to this point is intermittent fasting, and then increasing the diversity of your diet. Those are two really important things. Yeah. So now we've shown that you can add in the spores and you can significantly increase diversity by using the spores as well. So we are protecting against all of those things that are going wrong in that first figure I showed you, which is the reduction in keystone strains. So we know we can dramatically increase those keystone strains by adding the spores, and then even more when you add the prebiotic as well. We know that we can dramatically increase the diversity in the microbiome. And that data I showed you on diversity increase was just with the spores. We're waiting on the data from the spores plus prebiotic diversity tests as well. But we're starting to reestablish a protective functional microbiome, which means that you then start to reestablish that protective mucosa. And we see that from the increased production of short-chain fatty acids as well. Now that we're doing all of this, we feel very confident that we can protect against significant leaky gut. And that's what this study was that we published in 2017. This was a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial done by the University of North Texas, published in a well-established gastroenterology journal, that goes through peer review. And what we showed is that when taking the probiotic, and this was just the probiotic only, in the next iteration of the test, we're going to do the probiotic and prebiotic and a couple other variations. But what we basically showed is we are measuring that LPS, the one that I talked about that interacts with your fat cells and swells the fat cells. It's that same endotoxin produced in your gut that interferes with dopamine and serotonin function in the brain. It can get in your joints and induce rheumatoid arthritis. In men, it reduces testosterone production. That's another issue for athletes who are over the age of 40, who are trying to compete and losing muscle tone and have lower ability to rebuild muscle tone and recover because our testosterone levels are going down. High amounts of endotoxemia, leaky gut, reduces testosterone production. Right? So all of these impacts, it messes up our skin, messes up our gums, all of this stuff. So we did the study to show that LPS, can it be stopped from moving in from the lumen all the way to the circulatory system? And the way we did it is with the high fat, high caloric meal challenge. So basically one of the things that occurs when your gut is dysfunctional, if you eat especially a processed meal like a McDonald's breakfast, you end up getting a huge increase in endotoxin. So that's what you see here. This is the average individual that we were testing. We screened about 100 subjects. These were all healthy, normal people, meaning no diseases, no autoimmune conditions. They weren't on any medications. They were not clinically obese, any of that stuff. They were healthy, normal individuals. The average age was like 23, so they were relatively young as well. And what we saw was this huge increase in endotoxin, that LPS endotoxin, 5 hours after giving them this challenge meal. And this indicated that they had severe leaky gut. Now, what we did is we then gave them the probiotic for 30 days, sent them off, and told them to come back, and then we will redo this challenge again after 30 days. They didn't change anything about their lifestyle, diet, or anything in that 30 days, just taking the probiotic itself. When they came back in 30 days, the response was this, right? So we saw almost a complete blunting of the translocation of the bacterial toxin through the intestinal lining into the circulatory system, which means that we are stopping that leaky gut in as little as 30 days by just adding in the probiotic, right? So it's quite significant, quite profound. We didn't do anything else. And so next what we're doing is a 90-day version of the study where we're adding some IgG in one of the arms, and we're looking at adding in a prebiotic in the other arm to see what all we can modulate. But some of the other things that we saw change was all of these inflammatory markers. So this is the placebo-controlled group. What the colors show, this is something called a heat map. The more red and more intense the color, that means the higher the concentration was. So this is the concentration of all of these markers between the baseline and 30 days later in the placebo group, and then the baseline and 30 days later in the spore treatment group. And what we saw is all of these inflammatory markers, including triglycerides, all were reduced very significantly when you added in the spores in just 30 days. These people, the placebo group, actually became more inflamed at the end of 30 days. So their condition of leaky gut and having this translocation and increase in inflammatory compounds had started to continue to increase in that 30-day period versus being completely reversed and decreased in the spore treatment group. So, in the studies that we did where we saw we can modulate the microbiome by increasing keystone strains, by improving diversity, by increasing short-chain fatty acid production, then all of that was further validated by this double-blind placebo-controlled trial on leaky gut, showing that all of those things put together means you actually stop your leaky gut. And we stop all of the things that are going wrong when people are doing high-intensity training. Because at the end of the day, the negative aspect of high-intensity, long-term training, long hours of training, and the diet and lifestyle that goes along with it, is you end up with severe leaky gut. And that severe leaky gut has a profound effect on all the other aspects of your health and wellness. So that was the last slide.
So you should say, though, it's not a high-fat diet, healthy fats. It's a diet of crappy fats that you did in that study. Because a lot of people are low-carb, high-fat, or keto people nowadays. But that the study's based on eating like McDonald's crappy food fat diet. Right?
Well, so yes, but there is a nuance to that, right? So one of the studies that were done by the American Diabetic Association to look at what are the fats that actually generate the most leakiness in the gut and endotoxemia, believe it or not, is coconut oil. So coconut oil causes more endotoxemia and leakiness in the gut than even saturated fat from a McDonald's hamburger. Right. And the reason is, one of the problems is, in the health industry, when someone says something is good for you, then we all kind of go nuts with it, right? We're taking the coconut oil and we're putting it in our coffee and we're cooking with it and we're baking with it and we're going, this has got to be good for me. So I'm mouth
more
pulling.
Is better.
Yeah, exactly. More is better. But, most of the people you're talking to or who you're working with are of European descent. And their microbiomes are from European descendants who had never seen a coconut in their life, right? So the high saturated fat, long chain fatty acid content of coconut and the complexity of the fatty acids in coconut are not something that most Europeans' microbiome can deal with that well. Mm-hmm. Someone like me who comes from the tropics, my ancestors come from the equator. I lived on the equator for half my life. We eat coconut in everything. And so we can deal with coconut better. And if your gut is leaky, fat, even good fats, can cause more leakiness. So that's why I always say that it's fine to be ketogenic, to be higher fat, low carb. The problem with that, if your gut is leaky, eventually you're going to end up with more inflammation. Mm-hmm. So make sure you are addressing your gut to be able to take the advantage of all of those kind of diet and lifestyle choices. Right. So it all comes out of the gut. You got to fix the gut, and that makes your body resilient to things. And then one of the problems when you go low carb is that it's the carbohydrates that your good bacteria are taking and converting to short chain fatty acids. Right. Your carbohydrates, your bacteria cannot convert fat to short chain fatty acids or protein. It requires carbohydrates. So once you're going low on carbohydrates as it is, your production of short chain fatty acids becomes really minimized, and that can have an overall profound effect. So to overcome that, taking in a prebiotic can really help as well. So I tell people, if you're going to go keto, low carb, make sure your gut is not leaky, make sure you're taking adequate prebiotics, because you've got to continue producing high levels of short chain fatty acid, and then take it easy on the coconut oil, right? Yeah. We don't have to put it in everything and do it every day, 7 tablespoons a day, right? So MCT is a little bit better because MCT doesn't have the long chain, just the medium chain. So you're better off doing more MCT than all coconut oil. But still, you want to take it easy on that.
Definitely a lot of good truth bombs here today, and lots of information from you and the Megaspore Biotics we talked about. And then you can learn more on the website. We'll put everything in show notes because I know we're over time and you have places to go and people to get to. But the webinars you have on the website, and then we've got the Total Gut Restoration Program. So we can learn more on the website and do a follow-up interviews and talk about the Megaspore Biotic and then the prebiotic. You do the Megaspore for 30 days and then you go into the prebiotic. What's the best kind of routine to do?
Yeah, so you start with about a half a scoop of the prebiotic for the first week or so, just to get your body used to it and getting more and more bacteria utilizing it appropriately. And then after the first week, you can go to a full scoop once a day. And so then for that next 3-4 weeks, you're on the Megaspore and the prebiotic, that combination, and that starts to create all of this new microbiome within your gut, reestablishes your production of short-chain fatty acids, and starts to fix that intestinal lining. And then if you do have severe leaky gut and inflammatory conditions, we recommend adding in that mucosal support product, that Mega Mucosa, which provides the tools and the building blocks to rebuild that intestinal lining. So that becomes extremely important no matter what kind of diet you're on, no matter what lifestyle you're living, because we know we can have leaky gut no matter what, right? And a lot of it can be due to a single course of antibiotics we took when we were 15 years old. Yeah. And it perturbed our gut, and that same perturbation might exist today. Studies have shown that a single dose of clindamycin can perturb your gut for over 2 years. Wow. Right, and who hasn't taken multiple courses of antibiotics in their life, right? So all of the things that you're doing to lead a healthy lifestyle, you're eating your healthy fats and your protein, and you're exercising, you're doing your intermittent fasting, hopefully, and all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. You still have to address the leakiness of the gut, because you could still have leaky gut. Most people still do. In that healthy normal population that we tested, average age of 23, 55% of them had severe leaky gut. Wow. Right? So we didn't even expect that high. We thought maybe 25 or 30, because none of them had health conditions. But 55% of people who have no health conditions, who are young, of normal body weight, active, have leaky gut. And so, vast majority of us probably do.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, we'll put everything in the show notes, and we'll have to somehow in the new year do a live webinar for people to call in, because I think this is a huge topic. I know you guys have done a lot of webinars. You've been a part of a lot of summits, but I think we need one for the endurance athletes. I don't think people know the secret way to improve performance by working on your gut healing protocol. So thank you so much for this exciting information. I love it, and could do this for hours, but I know you need to go.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Debbie. Let's do it again sometime.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Whole Athlete Podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions, let us know on Facebook or at wholeathletepodcast.com. You can help us continue and grow by leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and see you next time.